other.
Yes, sir.
If you need something, that went. When I saw it.
Gail, can you confirm that you're up online?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I guess that means you can hear me.
I can hear you, yes.
Thank you. We are out of quorum with you, sir. And now I'll vote.
Here. All right, they already started the broadcast, so I think we are good to go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Technical Advisory Committee meeting for September 11th. First up is the call to order and introductions of anybody. Can we please have a roll call?
Jeff Sims,
Here.
Mike Williams,
Here.
Brian McCarthy,
Here.
I'm sorry, I'm remote. I'm trying to do something as I'm doing this. Jonathan Scott,
Here.
Michael English, Cal Hardy, Laura Lenhart,
Here.
Bob Fry. I think I saw him virtually. Bob, you are self-muted if you'd like to chime in. He is here virtually. Okay, let's see here. Gina Du,
Here.
Bob Campbell,
Here.
Jesus Peraza Garcia,
Here.
Rob Wassam, Frank Koffenauer, Jay Collins,
President.
Jennifer Malone,
Here.
Nicole Sutton,
Here.
Sarah Caper. Also here virtually. Sarah, you are self-muted.
Here.
Thank you. Let's see, by my count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We do have an in-person quorum.
Bob Fry is here, by the way. I didn't hear my name, sorry.
Thank you.
Capital P, capital H, lowercase g, u, e, s, t, exclamation.
Sorry. Okay. All right, thank you for that. So it does look like we have quorum. Next up is public comments. Do we have any members in person that wish to speak, or anyone online? Please declare something. Hearing none, I think we will move on. For the next item up is approval of the minutes from the August 7th meeting. Hopefully everybody had a chance to review them. I would note that there was quite a bit of discussion, and it seemed pretty well documented on the EV infrastructure topic, and that's coming back today for follow-up. So make sure hopefully everybody had a chance to read that and make sure everything is reflected properly. So is there any comments or questions regarding the minutes?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
On the name of the person who called the meeting's order, it says XXX here.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Did we have, were you here at the last meeting? Yeah, then that should probably be you. We will make that.
Okay, do I need to make that?
With, I mean, if there was a motion with that correction included.
Well, I mean, I don't know if we did, yeah, that's fine. I don't know if everybody heard that. The comment was at the very beginning of the minutes, should have chapter sentence calling the meeting to order at 1:32. Thank you for noticing that, Bob. Any other comments?
Well, then this is Jay Collins. I'll make a motion to approve with the following edit. Under number 1, call the meeting to order at 1:32 PM. The XXX should be Jeff Sims.
Can't be any more clear than that. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Jonathan Scott, second.
Jonathan with the second. Any all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I'm assuming none opposed. Great. Okay, next up is the first action item is the tip roll forward for Waterworks Park Sidewalk Gap.
Good afternoon, TAC. Johnny Wong, TPO staff. I'm going to be filling in for Roger Matthew, who had to step out for a little bit. I'm going to be presenting you with 2 tip amendments. The first one is a roll forward impacting 3 projects that have already been approved. And the other amendment is a project to fill in some sidewalk gaps near Waterworks Park. The slide that's in front of you shows the timeline of how the TIP and the FDOT work program are developed together. I'm going through the text very quickly. Every year in July, District 7 begins developing its 5-year work program. And then following an extensive review process, the work program is adopted in July of the following year. And TPO is provided with a summary snapshot of projects that will appear in the next year's TIP. Roll forward amendments to the TIP are needed. They're routine, but they are needed every year because projects that are identified in the previous TIP have funding programs, but the work may not have been able to be completed. As a result, the funds that are programmed must then be rolled forward into the next TIP so that the work can be completed in the next fiscal year. The TIP must therefore be amended to reflect the movement of funds, even though the projects themselves may not change at all. This slide is identifying the 3 projects that will be impacted by this roll forward amendment. Beginning at the top and working our way down, the first is Kennedy Boulevard resurfacing project on the segment that runs from South Woodland Ave out to Brevard Ave. The next project is I-4 eastbound way station truck parking, and then finally I-4 westbound way station truck parking. If you look at the column that identifies total cost and total net change, you'll see that one of the projects actually is receiving a net change. So it's projected to come in about $2 million under budget, which is a good thing. The 2 other projects, the way stations, are not affected at all. Again, although the projects aren't changing and they've already been approved, we decided to include a little graphic just to remind you of what the Kennedy Boulevard project will accomplish and what the others will also accomplish. The graphic at the bottom of this screen is indicating what Kennedy Boulevard will look like upon completion of the resurfacing and restriping. And if you compare that to the existing conditions shown at the top, you'll see that travel lanes and speed limits will be reduced while median and sidewalks will be widened. The top of this slide shows the $13.2 million that was programmed in fiscal year 23 to complete that resurfacing project. The bottom portion shows that 11.1 of that is being carried over, keeping in mind that it's projected to come in under budget. We were informed by DOT and city staff that the work has been delayed because of some utility work that was being completed that had forced DOT to push the start date a bit back. There you go. The 2 approved way stations along I-4 were also delayed because funding wasn't authorized by work program in time. So as a result, they're no longer going to be programmed in fiscal year 23, just getting pushed out to 24. These next 2 slides will show that nothing for either project, eastbound or westbound way stations, will change other than the funding being moved from fiscal year 23 to 24. I know that the numbers are very small, but if you can kind of like take a closer glance, you'll see that absolutely nothing's changed other than the year. The second amendment that I want to discuss is a project to fill in sidewalk gaps near Waterworks Park in Tampa. This project will enhance multimodal connectivity by eliminating some gaps near the entrance to Waterworks Park and throughout Tampa Heights District. One of the primary projects that DOT will be looking to design is a direct sidewalk connection from Tampa Street to Doyle Carlton, and that's right across the street from the entrance to Eulalie. This slide is showing the funding for the sidewalk gaps at $718,000, actually just a hair over $718,000. The work will be completed in fiscal year 24 using FDOT's carbon reduction funds. We reviewed this project, although specific locations aren't exactly available because this TIP amendment is funding design. We find that filling in sidewalk gaps is consistent with the goals of our TIP priority list. We did engage the public about these two amendments, specifically Waterworks Park, because that's a new project. So we published some signs around Waterworks Park. We published informational flyers on social media, created a web page with information about the project or what info is available. We did that 21 days prior to the TPO board meeting to approve this project. Staff's recommending approval of the roll forward and the Waterworks Park sidewalk gap amendments to the fiscal year 23-24 TIP. And we're asking that you approve it and forward it to the TPO board for consideration. And I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Johnny. Do we have any comments or questions regarding the presentation?
Just a comment.
Yes, Jay.
So, very happy, Johnny, to see the sidewalk gap being filled right there. When we actually worked with Park, DOT, HDR, and others on the Palm Avenue station for the TOD, that was actually identified as a gap by the neighborhoods in that area as an issue for them to actually get to Waterworks Park and to the Riverwalk for those folks who were living on the east side of Florida Avenue right there. So happy to see that that's coming in.
Yeah, that's great. There's a number of small projects that are going to be happening in or around that area. Some are funded by the CRA, so we're hoping that this is one project that'll just contribute to the changing character of that whole area.
Okay, very good. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, can I get a motion for approval as shown on the screen? Bob?
Make the motion to approve as the recommendation as shown on the screen.
Jay Collins, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, very good. Thank you, John.
All right, great. Thank you all.
All right, next up is the 2050 plan revenue forecast.
Good afternoon, Elizabeth Watkins, TPO staff. Let me get situated. Are you able to see the presentation slide?
Yes, well, now we can see the page with your notes.
Okay, how about now?
Now they're okay.
Excellent. All right, so you have two items on your agenda today relating to the long-range transportation plan. And the first one that I have for you today is the revenue forecast. And this is a really important building block as we go through this next year and a half in developing the long-range plan. Because at its core, there is a federal requirement to ensure that there are enough revenues available for the projects and programs that are illustrated in the plan, and that term for that has to be fiscally constrained. So this is the first step in that process where we identify all of the existing revenues for transportation through the year 2050. So I'm going to be showing you a lot of numbers today, but I'm going to really just try to hit the big picture points, and any questions you have on our methodology, I'd be happy to also answer those. So we'll be providing a summary for you of existing funding sources, some potential funding sources, essentially a scenario planning activity if the board and the committees and the public want the TPO to do that work later on. And then a summary of both of those together to really give that picture of what is available through 2050, what we're projecting to be available, and then what are some additional revenue sources that we could also consider through this plan. So before I jump into some of those forecasts, I wanted to emphasize and explain the development of this revenue forecast. So we could not do this without our amazing partners. So we had meetings with all of the jurisdictions, all of the operators, somebody who would know about the revenues available. So typically that was the chief financial officer from each jurisdiction and operator, as well as somebody like in a public works who is familiar with the projects and the CIP and that sort of thing. So we had an initial meeting explaining what this work was. Then we had follow-up discussions saying, hey, here's what we're projecting. Do you have any changes to that? And then we made those changes. So all that to say, this was not done in a vacuum. We relied heavily on our partners. Additionally, DOT has shown a tremendous leadership in the development of this forecast. We're really lucky to have a partner in them where they have their own economists and consultant teams project out for state and federal transportation forecasts. And you can see that full analysis in the appendices to the Hillsborough TPO's revenue forecast. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get into it. So this first slide is a summary of the revenue amounts for the federal and state highway funding in particular. So these funding sources listed here essentially are at the discretion of Florida Department of Transportation, District 7, as they make capacity improvements, safety improvements, bike walk improvements. We've kind of segregated those funds out because they have different rules, whether that be federal formula rules or even state allocation rules. So we got this information from DOT and have it illustrated here. The next graph is the revenues for those metropolitan and regional programs. And you'll notice they're quite a bit smaller than the previous slide illustrating the federal and state grants for transportation. But we thought it was important to keep the scale the same so you could get a sense of order of magnitude of how much is available in each pot, so to say. So these programs have the full programming discretion of the TPO board. In orange, that's the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, or SU. They're our most flexible transportation funding source. And then the other three are some of the other programs like carbon reduction, transportation alternatives, and transportation regional incentive programs. So over the life of the plan, they don't, they're smaller sources, but again, every dollar, every penny towards transportation matters, so they are illustrated here. We also work closely with HART to document their revenues that we could reasonably expect to be available through the year 2050. They're funded partially through FTA grants as well as state grants through the Department of Transportation. And additionally, the grants through the Florida Commission for Transportation Disadvantage to support that TD or transportation disadvantage work through Sunshine Line is also captured in this revenue forecast. This next slide are starting to break down the local transportation funds. And as I'm sure you all are very well aware, fuel taxes are one of the primary sources of local transportation funding here. So the constitutional tax on the far left, that's a 2-cent levy that is collected on behalf of the state and then given to the county. And then there's something called the 9th cent, which is 1-cent tax, and then something called the first local option fuel tax, and that's 5 cents on the gallon. And those are collected and distributed to the county and the other municipalities for their transportation needs. All right, so some additional local funding sources. So the streetcar is captured in here. They have a special assessment. It's a 0.33 mil. So we're forecasting out, about $100 million over the life of the plan through 2050. Sunshine Line, HART. So HART is the largest item on here. That includes ad valorem that they collect. That includes advertising. That includes fares and payment, that sort of thing that's captured there. And then the next line item down, that's transportation impact fees or mobility fees, depending on which jurisdiction you're in. So we have that documented there, as well as the first loft again. So I mentioned at the start of this, we also forecasted out some potential funding sources. These are segregated out in the long range plan, revenue forecast technical memo. Really, the purpose of doing this is when we get to the point in the long range plan where we want to have different options or scenarios of saying, okay, well, if we had that second option, local fuel tax, that additional 6 cents on the gallon, what could that fund based on the priorities that we've heard from the elected officials, stakeholders, public? So we have some description in the revenue forecast about that, as well as some text description about some innovative financing tools, such as value capture or TIFs. We weren't able to forecast that out because there are just lots of assumptions that would need to be made, but we thought it was important to acknowledge that those tools exist and they should be leveraged based on the individual needs of the levying entity. Additionally, we forecasted out, can you still see the slides? Sorry, I wasn't sure if go to. We forecasted out some local option sales taxes, including a renewal of that community investment tax, which is set to sunset in 2026. So if you're familiar with the CIT, you know that it's a 0.5 cent sales tax, or a 0.5% sales tax. And right off the top, 25% of that goes to the school board. And then an additional amount goes to pay down some of the bonds for Raymond James. But that remaining 70% or so is divvied up to local governments for their project purposes, whether that be public safety, transportation, parks, and rec. So it is a very important source of funding, but not all of it goes to transportation. So we acknowledge that it's set to sunset in 2026, and what could that renewal look like for transportation? Additionally, we have a forecast for the Charter County and Regional Transportation System surtax. Yes, that is the surtax that was passed by voters in 2018, but found to be unconstitutional based on the language of the ballot initiative a year or two by the Florida Supreme Court. So the forecast that we did put together was assuming that this would not be affected anytime sooner than 2029. And again, this is just a point of information for scenario planning in case this was something that the community wanted to, include in future plans. Additionally, we have forecasts on what if a millage increase or property taxes were used to directly fund transportation, as well as if the off-street parking program were to be expanded, and what those additional revenues could look like. We also have a series of other forecasts. If there was a fee on Uber and Lyft, or an updated vehicle registration fee, all of these we have a forecast for, but we wanted to acknowledge that these programs are not something that could be done locally. It would take legislative action and change in state statute to pursue. So we have a number for that, but we also wanted to caveat that these programs in particular aren't something that the county or the municipalities have authority to levy at this point in time. So here is a summary table, essentially laying it all out, all the different programs that I walked you through, and how much we expect to be available through 2050. But I will stop on this next slide because It shows the existing funding, everything that is gray, yellow, blue, orange, and green compared to everything in blue, which is potential. And I think this is a really impactful diagram to see here's how much we have allocated to transportation, but if we pursued other funding sources, it could make a pretty big difference just because of the order of magnitude of how much revenue that could be brought in. So I'll quickly just wrap up with some next steps. We are taking this roadshow to all the committees and we're bringing it to the board in October for their approval. And then we'll start working on those scenarios that I mentioned earlier based on public input and stakeholder input. And then we will have the long range plan done by November of 2024. So the action before you today is to approve the 2050 revenue forecast and then recommend approval to the TPO board. But I know that was a lot of information, so I would be more than happy to take any of your questions or comments and start that discussion.
Okay, great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Any comments on the financials here, Bob?
Not necessarily a comment, a question. In reading your report on the consumption annual growth rates in motor fuels through FY 2032, under gasoline, you have an annual growth rate 0.77, 0.57, 0.66, and all of a sudden at 2027 down to 32 goes from 0.09 down to 0.01 growth. Is that because it's changing the fleet on electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles? Is that the change in the consumption rate?
That's a great question, and we have some slides hidden that talk about those assumptions specifically, but to directly answer your question, those growth rates are given to us through the state of Florida based on their revenue estimating conferences. And we did notice that the growth rate decreased later on, and that is likely due to the proliferation of higher fuel efficient cars to EVs further penetrating the market. So not only in Florida, but nationally, we are seeing that the buying power for the fuel taxes are not growing. They're actually decreasing because of those factors that I mentioned.
My second question is, it looks like there's consistently each year's amount of money coming in, but it looks like decreased fuel consumption, but increase in VMT. Is that correct in this report?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Yes, it looks like the consumption rate goes down, but the VMT goes up. So we have a constant, almost through the whole design life here, on each of these categories, the same amount of money coming in. It has to be the growth in VMT, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The growth in Florida, that we are seeing like the VMT go up, so we are kind of protected from that, but there is kind of a cliff of when will that VMT and that fuel consumption, how does that levy off? And again, we pulled those numbers directly from the Florida State Estimating Conference and those assumptions, so those were baked in given direction from the state.
Well, but those are basic assumptions. I just want clarification that it's growth in VMT. Are we getting more for it? Correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Bob. Great questions. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Okay, hearing none, none online. So we are looking for a motion to approve the 2050 plan revenue forecast and forward to the TPO board for consideration. Can we get a motion?
So moved.
Bob Campbell with the motion. Do we have a second?
Full second, I'll second.
Thank you, Nicole. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, next up is the 2050 plans need assessment.
All right. Good afternoon, TAC members. I'm Vishakha Shibraman, TPO staff, and today I'm here to present the results of the 2015 Long Range Transportation Plan Needs Assessment for Congestion Management and Crash Mitigation. So let's begin with the presentation. The 2050 plan will match the forecasted revenues to the desired level of performances for several key indicators of the transportation system, based on the expected costs to achieve those level of performance. Today, this presentation will focus mainly on one of the ingredients, which is the congestion management and crash mitigation. These are some of the other indicators that are being studied as part of the 2050 plan development. As part so once the public has decided what level of performance they desire, then they will estimate how much money would be required and then match the revenues to that condition, which is what Elizabeth explained in the previous presentation. So from here, I'll move on to the methodology. This section will explain what is the methodology we use for forecasting, crash mitigation, and congestion management, and how we estimated the cost to achieve the performance and improve performance. To estimate the number of crashes and congestion in 2050, we worked with a consultant who used a proprietary sketch planning tool to generate these forecasts. This tool takes the model outputs from the regional travel demand model and includes the forecasted volumes and applies the algorithms to calculate the travel time reliability, minutes of delay, and crashes by severity and type on some of the major corridors. These numbers represent the expected crash and performance if nothing was done for either of the crashes or congestion. But in order to see how much improvement we could achieve for the year 2050 with the level of investment, we worked with local governments and selected treatments that could be applied to some of the most congested corridors and their generalized cost estimates for the use. The benefit of each treatment were estimated based on the Federal Highway TOPS DC and research from the Crash Modification Factor Clearinghouse, CMF Clearinghouse. So here I begin with the congestion management scenarios. We assume that a baseline annual budget is spent for the crash performance for $24 million. And this is based on the historical data that the local governments have been spending. These treatments are applied to the most congested corridors. For freeways, we chose ramp metering and part-time hard shoulder running as some of the treatments. And for arterials and collectors, we chose the adaptive signal control technology and timing, which is automated ATMS measures. This slide will show you some of the results that is coming out of those investments. If the current spending level holds through 2050, which is the assumption, we can deploy these treatments and achieve improvement on over 142 miles of roadway, which will result for collector, you can see a result of 39% reduction in delay with a speed increase of 9%. For the interstate and freeways, there is even a higher reduction in delay of over 49% with a speed increase of 9%. Oh, sorry, speed increase of 18%. Moving on to crash mitigation factor. Again, we assume a similar budget, which is about 25 million annually, based on the recent spending trends from the local government. The treatments that we considered here were also deployed with the local government partners based on the most common treatments that are being deployed currently. And these include what is listed here. We considered physically separated bike lanes, pedestrian crosswalks and beacons, On undivided highways, we considered converting two-way left turn lanes to median and access management techniques, including driveway density reduction. In addition to that, we also looked at traffic calming and speed enforcement to reduce the speeds. This is a similar table like you had seen for the congestion management. At the baseline investment of 25 million per year, which we assumed for that, we are expecting treatments to be done on 785 central line miles of high roads, resulting in about 25% total crash reduction by the year 2050. You can see that bike and pet crashes have even a greater result, which will be reduced by more than 54% in that time period. So while we acknowledge that the needs are greater than what we have presented today, we are also awaiting guidance from the TPO board in October and the public to inform the expected crash and congestion performance levels. And while we are waiting for the guidance, we developed a performance cost curve to estimate how much money is required to reduce the congestion and crashes to certain levels. The takeaways today I'm leaving you is that by investing 24 million per year on congestion management projects, we could reduce the delay by 39% and increase the congested speeds, making it closer to the posted speed limit by over 8%. Similarly, for safety, if we spend 25 million per year, fatal crashes and serious injury crashes can be reduced by 25%. Bike pet crashes have even a greater percentage by 54% by the year 2050. Again, the results what I presented to you were only the primary results. We are waiting for guidance from the TPO board next month, and that is when we will close out the needs assessment. But in the meantime, today we are looking to your recommended action to approve this draft 2040 plan needs assessment report and forward it to the TPO board for consideration. And I can take any questions or comments today.
Thanks, Vishaka. Do we have any comments or questions, sir?
Thank you, Vishaka. I was just wondering if you looked at different scenarios or if that's one of the things you're waiting on when the TPO board looks at it. The thing that really struck me is that the fatal crashes would be 25% improved, but that's still a long way from Vision Zero, which I know is a program we all work very closely towards. So how did you reconcile that? Did you look for a way to increase those? To decrease the fatal crashes even more, or is that just because there was this much money, this is what happened?
Yes, thank you for the question. So that's exactly what we did now. What I mentioned in one of the slides was that we are just looking at the current spending levels. And with this spending level, we can achieve the results that I presented today. We are also looking at a performance levels scenario, which is to increase the spending, whereby we can reduce the crashes. We just don't have a final number for it because while we are waiting for the revenue forecast to be finalized, we are testing other scenarios as well.
So will we see this again after you've done that, or is this our only time looking at it?
This is the only time we're going to be presenting this, but the report will be updated and I can send forward it to you as I get more information, and then I can contact you all with the updated information. Thank you.
Yes, Bob.
But can you go back to your analysis? Most of the analysis was done on arterials.
Was it for the safety or the
It says,
condition?
Divided arterials and undivided arterials, and then collectors and locals were not in the analysis, correct?
Most of these treatments were mainly applicable for arterials, as you can see. So that's why our majority of the analysis was done on these corridors.
Okay, so most of the arterials, functional classification arterials in the county are state roads. Is this analysis exclusive to state roads?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that question.
Is the analysis exclusively on state roads?
No, we considered all the roads.
But the analysis says arterials divided and undivided. The previous part of the presentation says collectors and others were not included in the analysis. We're over half of the vehicle miles of travel and actions in the county are actually on county roads rather than state roads. I just want clarification of the analysis before we make a recommendation to the.
I have the list of roads. We looked at individual corridors and I have those results in the report. I just don't have the report in front of me right now.
Vishaka, I believe if you go to the next slide where it said arterials on the side, are there other tables in this report that would refer to collectors and not just divided and undivided arterials?
No, this is the
Okay,
only.
so it
table.
is just limited to arterials?
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, follow up, and the arterials are owned by the state. And most of its analysis are based on state roads and recommendations on state roads rather than municipality and county roads.
Can I refer back to the report and then confirm that for you?
Thank you.
I mean, are you, is it, you satisfied with getting a response, after the meeting, by reference to that report?
Well, this was a recommendation on the to develop a program, writing money for sources. Correct.
Well, this is,
For congestion and for crashes. So,
yeah. Well, this is pretty much just a projections of potential savings based on investment of money, right? It's not
Yes.
actual investment of money.
No,
It's,
this is just a projected and it is based on what the tool predicts. So this is just a predicted crashes based on the output from the travel demand model. And that's how this is the level of investment which will achieve this targets, which will have these impacts.
Right, okay.
The only thing I don't have in front of me is because there are two sets of, there are safety and congestion management improvement scenarios. I just have to look at the report. It's in the website, but I'll just look back, refer back to it and get with you an answer. If that's okay.
Again,
Go ahead.
again, a good portion of the vehicle miles of travel and crashes occur on other than state roads in this urban area. And this may understate the benefits of these alternatives you have, which I probably a little higher benefit because these techniques we're using should result in safety on county roads as well as state roads.
I do have the list pulled up on my phone from the report, and it does look like some of them are county roads, but I'm not sure how these particular roads were selected to be included.
This was all the roads that we looked at from the county. So,
But how did you decide which county roads to look at?
from the Vision Zero safety plan and also the output from the model, we looked at all the corridors in the municipal county network.
So if I may, the modeling structure is divided into freeways, divided arterials, undivided arterials, and other roadways, which is collectors and other local roads combined.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And that table does list out the roads by name.
It has the roads by name, but it's unclear to me without looking it up if they are, what kinds of roads they all are, because it's not, it's not all of the roads that the county has, so it's trying to figure out which roads made it into here, which you said is ones that were either from the Vision Zero plan or the model.
TPO network, yeah.
The TPO network. But I'd have to do some more research to figure out if they're collectors or arterials or both. I agree with Bob, that would be helpful information to understand, because the slide only has the arterials.
Yeah, this is just a summary slide. I'll give you, I'll follow up with a detailed answer for that.
But when I look at this would probably be, if anything, an understatement of the potential, right?
That's correct.
So in that regard, I think it's or I wouldn't call it a worst case scenario. I mean, it's best case scenario in that it's the minimal that the model's projecting would be the improvements. So I think that covers in a good way for our consideration. I said that right. So turned around there, but okay, so we appreciate that. Any follow-up information on that would be appreciated.
I will do.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, great. Hearing none, we're looking for a motion to approve the 2050 plan needs assessment for congestion management and crash mitigation forward to TPO board for consideration. Can we have that motion?
Jonathan Scott, motion to approve.
Jonathan's motion approved. Do we have a second?
Jay Collins, second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good.
Thank you,
Michelle.
and I'll follow up with the updated performance scenario results. Thank you.
Okay, next up is the Bills broke down on TPO electric vehicle infrastructure plan, which, as you recall, this is, we requested some additional research to be done, so this is a follow-up from last month's presentation.
Right, good afternoon, TAC, Connor McDonald, TPO staff. We just did this in presentation mode. All right, I'm here to present a follow-up on the electric vehicle infrastructure plan. You'll remember last month, the full presentation. The TAC received the presentation and at the August committee meeting, and we solicited comments and addressed feedback. So this presentation will open discussion now that members have had a chance to review the report, but I'm gonna answer those questions that you had previously. So first, there was a concern on the wording reduction in parking minimums. So the language was a reduction in required minimum parking in return for offering EV charging. That was a recommendation in the report, and we changed that to permit the substitution of generic parking for EV parking to meet required minimums. It was asked if there was a possibility that the technology will extend the range where the infrastructure may not be needed as saturated down the road. It's recommended that range enhancements and other emergent technologies be considered in future iterations of the plan, with staff monitoring technology developments. It was asked how TECO participated in the EV IP development. TPO staff worked closely with TECO throughout the production. Most recently, since the last committee meeting, staff shared the policy recommendations with TECO, and TECO did not express any concerns or comments at this time. There was a question on the replacement or maintenance of a charging facility. We did address that as well. Added language that recommends maintenance contracts should be put in place to determine the responsibility of maintenance, whether that's the site host, charging network, or installer, and also the response time, time for a given repair, and that an overall uptime requirement should be included in a contract. So with that, the recommended action today is to approve the electric infrastructure plan and recommend approval to the TPO board. And I'll take any comments or questions on these and also the full report.
Okay, thank you, Connor. Second.
While he's looking, can you put the first question?
Yeah, the first.
Of course.
You would, I didn't digest it.
So the idea here would be in replacement of parking minimum, would be permit the substitution of generic parking for EV parking. So those minimums, you could use the EV spots to meet that minimum instead of reducing the amount of it.
So it's saying that it's, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jack.
It's just simply saying that it's a 1-for-1.
Yes. So it's the replacement, incorporating that word specifically was a little awkward, just phrasing it in terms of a policy recommendation. So that's why we changed it to permit the substitution of generic parking for EV parking, that same concept of replacement.
I remember that discussion. Does that address what our primary concern was? I remember it was Jay, you were talking about the minimums. Or I know one of the concerns was whether the EV spaces could overtake the needs of the typical vehicle at this time and then leave the site short on available spacings, and thus those vehicles were allowed to park in the EV spots, which defeats kind of the purpose of the, I don't know if that was related to this comment exactly, or that was just an observation. Trying to recall. Yes, Bob.
I think I made a statement, but go back to the revenue projection clarification on the state forecast for the revenue coming in. It clearly says here, you look at it, the percentage of hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles in the fleet is going to be changing between now and the year 2030.
Yes.
So, but the VMT keeps growing. It means there's growth in trip to land development. So the actual use of vehicles is going to increase. But the type of vehicle making those trips is going to be more electrical. So you still will need the parking spaces, electric or hybrid or gas. You will still need the same amount of spaces in the land development process, not reducing the number of parking spaces because of electric vehicles.
And I agree with you. I think really the question was whether if you're segregating them to allow EV only, whether that would limit it until they came to that point when they were more dominant. And I don't know that we can get an answer for that here. I think it was more of a, we wanted to make sure that was being considered. And then this one had to do with, I think it was the offset, whether there was the opportunity that a developer could reduce the minimum based on kind of a loophole. And I think we wanted to clarify that they can. And because it had to do with an incentive, I believe the word was incentive.
Right.
So this is ensuring that the minimum number of spaces have to be maintained. That's in current code now, right?
Yes. So it wouldn't change that amount. Wouldn't change that.
Okay. So I believe that addresses what the intent was. I keep looking over here because I thought Jay was.
I believe Bob brought it up, and then all of us chimed in to have that conversation with how parking works.
Right. Okay. So I guess we're good with that one. I can, yeah, other than that, go and scroll forward.
Yes. So I believe this was Jay's question. How, if the vehicles will have more range, how that will address, how it can be addressed. Of course, we can't predict based on current, like, we don't know what the ranges will be, so it's difficult to predict that. So just the recommendation is that we monitor that. Tico's participation, I believe this was one of Mr. Frey's questions.
Right. I think that was probably addressed with your answer there.
So we did send the full recommendations to Tico and ask for comments.
Right. And then Bob he expressed a concern about, I can't remember the word verbiage he used, but it was about a business becoming, like, going into another tier where it can impact them greatly if they provide networks and parking, stuff like that. Super something.
Super users, I think it's
super users, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, I do recall that. And we did reach out to Mr. Frey, kind of wanted him to elaborate on this question some more so we understand clearly. The super user reference was in terms of, I believe it was super users in terms of companies just owning the charging infrastructure itself. Is that correct, Mr. Frey?
My memory serves me, if Bob can't chime in, I believe one of the things he was talking about was when it jumps up to the next level, like industrial production, and your rates can change. Things, I guess, of that, and then the infrastructure that the actual development has to put in for the amount of wattage it pulls. There's a variety of different things depending upon what you're doing, except I've never heard of an EV charging station anywhere pulling that. I mean,
I know that there's been a lot of discussions on the advanced air mobility side on that, but not on the EV side. And I know that, like, even Florida Power and Light and Tico and some others are really, they're trying to work to understand that now, but you're still so far out. And that also involves conversations with the PSC and like some other things that it's not even up to the local jurisdiction necessarily, or Tico really, to make those determinations. Yet that's part of a broader conversation on electrification in general.
Yeah, I think part of his comment too was about just getting it out there to be conscious of it, that it could happen if somebody really, so with that, and haven't heard any other comment on it, I think we'll just close it, especially knowing that you interacted with them about it. So is there any other comments on the presentation?
Just want to say thank you for bringing this back and really appreciate the changes, especially on like the parking requirements and those types of things. Like, you know, again, as I shared last month, kind of our like, ooh, what did we do here? And learning lessons. So I really appreciate the work that you put into this, and really it turned out to be great. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and that's what we're here for, to address your comments, and we appreciate it.
And I do have one minor, I just recalled it as you go through, when it talks about, you know, adding in that you were going to evaluate maintenance needs of the chargers. Can you go back to that slide real quick?
Of course.
Because I didn't recall seeing the word replacement among, and I think, again, if this is just simply to mention that they should consider it, I think the word replacement should be in there, because that's really what we ran into, was there wasn't a replacement cost considered when we we got a grant, so everybody was happy to get them thrown in there, but then nobody was really thinking about, well, what happens when these, in this case, the software way bad, not the units, but.
Okay.
You know, but I don't know, you can put it, it's, because I believe this is more of just saying, you know, the report's going to, you know, acknowledge that as being a concern, you know, if that's the way. So with that only minor comment, no other comments or questions, I think we're looking for a motion. So can I get a motion to approve the electric vehicle infrastructure plan and recommend approval?
This is Jay Collins. I'll make the motion to approve the electric vehicle infrastructure plan and forward to the TPO board for consideration.
Okay, thank you, John. Jenny, will be the second.
Jennifer Malone, second.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, very good. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you.
All right, and last up is the memo of understanding on creating a new Tampa Bay regional MPO. This is a pretty big topic. I mean, we saw this at the ITS committee and kind of didn't think about it much until they presented and realized, you know, the scope of what they were discussing. So I expect a fair amount of discussion on the back end of this, but you know, again, just keep that in mind as we listen going forward. Elizabeth.
Thank you. Yes, this is a very important topic, and appreciate being on the agenda today to solicit input from the TAC. So to first set the stage, there's something called transportation management areas, this geography in yellow, which is essentially at the core of what an MPO is, how it's designated, how the funds are distributed. So this is very important. And you can see in yellow, it's sprawling. The Tampa St. Pete Transportation Management Area has expanded significantly over the past 50 so years that it's been in existence, and spans 3 counties, Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas. Back in the last legislative session, the Florida legislature passed a law requiring the MPOs that serve Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas to submit a feasibility report exploring the benefits, costs, and process of consolidating into a single MPO. So that will be due to the legislature by the end of the year. And for those of you who have been in the MPO MPO world for a while, you know that mergers of the 3 MPOs in the Tampa Bay region is not something, it's a perennial conversation. I think most recently, TBARTA did a study in 2018, 2019, kind of exploring the feasibility of this. So there's lots of reasons for that, but this is the most recent push to start working towards a merger. And this feasibility report will be transmitted to Tallahassee by the end of the year. So to lay a little more context, proponents of mergers say having a regional MPO will help define the transportation agenda, build that trust and collaboration across jurisdictional lines, and also help us compete more effectively with other regions for funding. It also could serve as an opportunity to help align regional transportation planning with economic development planning. And merging all together would actually make us the largest MPO by population in the entire state of Florida. So that could also give us an edge. And those who are not proponents of mergers and would prefer all three MPOs to kind of retain their existing structure, which means one MPO in each of the three counties. Say what's at risk is smaller communities and neighborhoods losing influence, kind of the implicit the implicit thought that regional projects may compete more effectively than local projects. When you think of local projects, I think of like sidewalks and smaller scale mobility things rather than a regional project, maybe interstate connectivity, big major projects that go across jurisdictional lines. I think regional and local projects look different to a lot of different people, but acknowledging that core concern of maybe those smaller scale projects losing influence. Additionally, merging does not guarantee any more funding. The formula is the formula, and that will not change. That is prescribed in federal law. So, so take that for what that's worth. It isn't a guarantee, but Secretary Gwynn says in his experience, when he goes to Tallahassee to help advocate for more transportation dollars, specifically discretionary transportation dollars for the region, his experience has been that Orlando and Jacksonville outcompete us because we don't have that unified voice. And then lastly, one of the cons is it's a potential to weaken coordination between land use and transportation planning. Forward Pinellas, which is the the agency that fills the MPO role in Pinellas County, they are both a land use and transportation planning agency. The Hillsborough TPO sits within the Hillsborough County Planning Commission. So there is that inherent kind of coordination of land use and transportation. Some of our staff help review comp plan amendments and site plans and those sorts of things. And if this were a separate entity, there's a potential to weaken that coordination. So in your packet was a copy of the proposed MOU, essentially outlining the principles of merging the MPOs by July 1st of 2027. And I want to be really clear about something. The MOU doesn't commit to a merger. It doesn't put anything in stone. What it does, or what the intention behind it is to have a local framework for working towards a regional MPO based on local needs and our unique situation here in the Tampa Bay area. There has not been a merger of MPOs ever in the state of Florida. I'm only aware of one in Texas and then one in Connecticut over the past 20 years. So this isn't something that happens very often, but I think the fear has been if we don't show leadership at the local level on working towards a merger, then Tallahassee might do it for us. So that's just some context for why this MOU is being proposed. And it proposes a few different guiding principles as the entities work through potentially merging. So I only hit the highlights here. The full MOU is in your packet. But the big one is apportionment. What should that voting membership look like? State statute says that it should be proportional representation based on population, but that's not a hard and fast formula. So here on the Hillsborough TPO board, we're really lucky to have our transportation operators also sit on the board. That's not how it works in Pasco or Pinellas. So one of the principles in this MOU is that the representation should be based on population, and then if there are additional seats, those should be made available for other entities. So it doesn't say no operators, but it just says generally that it should be proportional representation. It also talks about balancing local and regional needs, like I mentioned earlier, how important it is to maintain county level planning for sub-regional topics and have a pipeline of projects and a pipeline of planning studies to ensure that both sets of needs are being met. Funding is also important. The MPO program is a reimbursable program, so there would need to be a long-term local government funding commitment to help float these grants until they could be reimbursed, 3, 6, 9 months later. Outreach is really important. in Hillsborough in particular, Beth has gone to all 4 agencies or all 4 municipalities and sought their feedback and on this process, as well as making sure that our agreements and federally required plans and programs are being met. So I mentioned, there's not a roadmap for this or an example that we can look to directly in Florida. So we're kind of building this as we go. So it's a proposed 4-year timeline of working towards this regional MPO. But in 2023, we're very much focused on helping define that apportionment or that voting structure, as well as defining what a business model and budget would look like. Essentially, what would it cost to stand up a regional MPO? And then, of course, doing outreach to local governments and the public. So we had a public survey out from July to August, and we received about 1,700 responses and a lot of input on how this proposal should move forward, if at all. And we didn't have a question on there that said, do you support a merger, yes or no? And that was intentional because MPOs are kind of, not everybody knows what an MPO is. So we didn't want to just have that question out there. But we did have questions that spoke to the factors that could help shape how a future regional MPO should set up. So we had a question on there about, should decisions be made at the local level or more at a tri-county regional level? For your Citizens Advisory Committee, would you prefer that local or regional? Do you want virtual options for public engagement? So a lot of questions in there that would help inform a future regional MPO that could be helpful to decision makers as they go through this process. So one of the areas where I would love your input today is, let's say that this regional MPO concept moves forward. What would that look like for the Technical Advisory Committee? Y'all and the Citizen Advisory Committee are the only 2 that are required by state statute. So you're not going anywhere, but curious on your thoughts about what that could look like. Would you prefer that it met, only at the regional level? So representatives from Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough met just regionally, or do you prefer maybe a hybrid of having the local county TACs still be established and then a regional TAC? So I think there's lots of different iterations of what that could look like if this proposal were to move forward, and we would be very interested in your thoughts on that. So I'll wrap up with just a summary of some next steps. So the most immediate next step is next Friday, September 22nd, the TMA Leadership Group will be meeting to further discuss apportionment and business model, and then recommending this MOU to go back to each of the 3 MPO boards for execution. And then in early fall, each of the 3 MPOs will consider that MOU. And then it will go back to the TMA Leadership Group as one of the components of that feasibility report that's due to the legislature by the end of the calendar year. Essentially, the MOU is that process requirement that the legislature has put on us. So the recommendation before you today is to recommend that the TPO board sign the Creating a Tampa Bay MPO MOU. And I'd like to reiterate one more time that signing this MOU or even recommending signing the MOU doesn't say that you're for or against a merger. It's just that you would recommend that the TPO board sign and execute that agreement. But look forward to the discussion, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Very good. Thank you, Elizabeth. But before we get discussions, I'm just curious, have you heard about other responses from Pasco and Pinellas? I mean, does it seem to be going forward through those committees, or do you know yet?
So from what I've heard from their boards, and Forward Pinellas, it seems to be moving nicely. From what I've heard in Pasco, some meetings they're for it, some meetings they're against it. So I feel like that's a little bit of a wild card from my own observation.
Just curious, but, okay, so I'll open it up for comments or questions. Again, I think it's something everybody should really consider the perspective of where we sit as a committee and also your agency and everything going forward. Because this, even though it's not committing to anything, I think there is some essence of support in a way by the committee level that we recommend going forward. And so I think we really need to be careful about making sure we understand it. That's all. Gina.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to start, just to answer your question on, because I sit on the TMA for the airport, and I think originally Pasco was the one pushing it. And then there's been some questions over the apportionment based on the population. And so that's where the hand wringing with Pasco is right now, is that Pasco is very much the one pushing this because of some of the actions that our Hillsborough TPO board, specifically, that there are projects that quite frankly were not done and the funding wasn't sent here. And I think that that's some of Secretary Wynn's consternation on it is, I mean, my parents live in Jacksonville. I drive on the money that our TPO voted away 5 years ago. So, I mean, that's that there are those absolute, you can point to specific projects where not necessarily recommendations made on this committee, but that the board absolutely gave away hundreds of millions of dollars to other regions of the state, which is where Secretary is coming from. And I think that and those projects would have definitely benefited Pinellas and Pasco more than necessarily the residents of Hillsborough County, because they're not the roads that we necessarily drive on as much. So that is from my participation on it, that's where Pasco is coming from. The airport absolutely supports this. This is how we get international flights. We don't talk about that we serve Tampa, we talk about that we serve the region. And it is time that we all start acting like a region. And with the absence of T-BARDA and with the absence of these other things, there are absolutely projects that we are losing out on. When I got here 10 years ago, everybody thought I was crazy thinking that I could get $200 million for the airport, and I did it. But I didn't do it by just talking to the people that are elected officials in Hillsborough County. We went as far north as Citrus, and we went down as far north as Manatee, far south as Manatee, and west over to Polk County. And that's why I built the delegation, that's why I built the support to do those things. And I think that is what the secretary is asking us to at least consider. And to Elizabeth's point, this doesn't bind us to anything. I think the other part of this is, and I think that that Alden's done a really good job of explaining this at every TPO board meeting this comes up. This is happening whether, to look at it is whether it's happening whether we like it or not. The legislature is going to do something. It's whether or not we want to, it's how much does Hillsborough want to participate in that? Because Pinellas and Pasco are there. And so it's how much say goes into that, because this is going to happen, to at least look at it. And there is absolutely this push to do it. So as far as the committees, I don't just ranting on this for the 18th time this month. I think that keeping the committees local makes sense. I think that the representatives from Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco will want to know how these things are impacting their communities locally, but let the full decision be at a broader regional level. So each county can still have their technical advisory committee and their citizens advisory committee, but ultimately rolling up to a regional board that includes the modes of transportation, because we all, whether it's the port, whether it's the airport, whatever happens with Heart and PSTA, those are now regional. The port and the airport have always been regional. We just happen to only sit on this. So now that my rant for the 18th time on this one is over, sorry. I know there's a lot of people who heard me say this way too much, but.
No, I think that's the feedback they're looking for. There are, I think our pros and cons slide really, sum it up, because obviously leverage is huge. But, you are giving up potentially some, local, closer assessment of it. And if we did go to different committees, people I'll look at, not to call them out, but I'm looking at Brian, he's representing Temple Terrace, which is one municipality. I don't know that Pasco and Pinellas really cares about Temple Terrace, as a single, but I feel like they're very important for what we do. I represent Hillsborough County, that's our jurisdiction. I think in some case I have a little bit of a say on the air quality of this level, but the fact is our gauges are here and it's mostly Hillsborough. So the makeup might have to change if we didn't maintain a local one. I do think there is some relevance to maybe having a periodic meeting on a regional level, but The other part I think about in this game of ITS, I don't know about a lot of the small projects in those counties. I don't know a lot about the small ones here in some ways, but at least I'm familiar with the roads. There, I would even have less input, so it would seem like, I mean, personally, I would think we should maintain at least a contingent at the committees at the local levels with some maybe crossover on occasion. But again, that's just offering my opinion as chair, as just another commenter here. But I welcome any other comments for Elizabeth to figure out.
So I'll go next. So thank you for the presentation, Elizabeth, and there's a lot of good information there, and a lot of good pros and cons, and there is a lot of debate, a lot of political debate. Some of it is just pure politics, you know, and as somebody that works for a board that has mixed opinions about whether this should move forward or not, for me personally, while I appreciate the discussion and all, I don't think it's something that I should vote on or take a position on. And I don't know, I can't speak for other Hillsborough County, Sarah and Bob, people on this board, but to me, it's something I'm not comfortable voting on just because our board is mixed. Unlike the airport, who sounds like fully supports it, that's great. But I know our board is mixed, so I will not vote. I'll be abstaining today.
Okay, Bob.
I'm going to be abstaining on this particular motion as up here as well.
You don't, so you don't intend to vote? So,
I'm abstaining from voting on it. Recommendation.
Sarah?
I will also abstain. I do find just, it's very challenging as a local government staff person to vote on some of these things. And I know the board had a discussion on it. So I know that the BOCC did have the presentation from Beth Alden, and they had a lot of discussion. But just as like a general kind of comment, I find it's very difficult to take action on something that, something like this, where the BOCC could have thoughts on it, and we don't always know the direction of their thoughts. It's a little different than some of these technical studies, like the electric vehicle infrastructure plan or the LRTP. Is a different kind of thing, and it's just a little challenging as a staff of BOCC to take action on this.
And I kind of agree with you. I mean, when you look at the charge of this committee is the technical advisory committee, and it's intended to look more at project-specific aspects and impacts across that. This seems to go beyond what I think the scope of this committee would normally be expected to pass an opinion on. In retrospect, it is not committing to anything to us. And ultimately, an ITS committee, it was a little while ago, but we voted for it, and that was the rationale I gave when I ultimately did vote, but to approve it because it didn't commit it. And so I respect that aspect of it. But again, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but that I have an equal opinion. I don't actually vote unless I pass the county, but I feel like it's beyond what we should be voting on, period. But having said all that, I want to make sure we're giving good feedback to Elizabeth as a committee, regardless of how the vote is. Yes, Jay.
So that was one of the things I was interested about, Elizabeth, is some of the conversation you've already heard. And what exactly does our vote buy? What is the action other than to recommend that the TPO either say yay or nay?
Yeah, honestly, Jay, how we're intending to use this information is just how any other recommendation from the board would come. When it comes before the board in October, we'll give a brief highlight of the ITS committee and the Livable Roadways committee supported it. CAC did not. Hypothetically, they haven't taken action. So we'll just be using that information for the board to take into their consideration as they make this decision. This decision fully lays with the TPO board. So it's really just the TAC as a recommending body. It doesn't bind them into anything. It really is just a recommendation. but I totally respect not wanting to take action from some members. So it's fully at your discretion. But that's how this information will be used. I've been taking some notes that we will pass along, but it will just be summarized, reported back to the TPO board.
And the process that we're doing here today is a defined process for the other two co-signers of the memorandum of understanding, or are they allowed to do whatever they want, being that we're going in this fashion and they can go in their fashion however they want to get to the end for their boards?
So I am not as familiar with the Pasco MPO or the for Pinellas's kind of business procedures, but we're just treating this how we would any other action that goes before the TPO board, bringing it to all committees and then reporting back. So I'd have to go back and check the committee agendas for both Forward Pinellas and Pasco to speak on that definitively.
And if I read it correctly, the reason the memorandum of understanding is being drafted is a proverbial what if. If Tallahassee actually provides action to create, then the three entities are already starting to work together on what to do if Tallahassee does that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption. I think what this MOU is trying to accomplish is saying, hey, Tallahassee, we hear you loud and clear, but we can handle this on local terms. So this will be part of that feasibility study sent back to the legislature by the end of the year to lay out that process of coordinating, and then the hope and the intention. And Whit Blayton, he's president of APA Florida, and one thing that he shared with me is that I think it was Senator DeSegli, who was the sponsor of the bill, has said, if you guys can do this local level, he didn't anticipate bringing more legislation. And again, that doesn't mean that that's set in stone, but I think what Tallahassee is looking for is for the Tampa Bay region to come together on this and start working towards a regional MPO. And this is the mechanism to do that.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Please continue.
No, that was it. Just that this is the locally driven option to merging, because the fear is if this should show consensus among the region. If this doesn't happen, then who knows what that next move will be from Tallahassee. It's complicated for a number of reasons, but I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you.
It's one of those, this is reacting to legislation and giving the local community the opportunity to weigh in versus, and so it's one of those, and that's where I think Beth's done a very good job of explaining, you might not like this, but if you don't want it dictated to you, provide input. And I get where everybody's coming from here. I was talking more broadly to the TPO board that this is not one of those optional things that, and to Elizabeth's point, I spoke to Senator DeSegli last week at the Florida Autonomous Vehicle Summit, and he's very much looking forward to seeing if anything comes out of this. And if not, it will be something that maybe our local officials don't like as much. I mean, it's that like,
yeah.
But again, I totally get where everybody's coming from in this room, that we're in a different position because I know where my board members are. So
right.
It's that.
And I think that's the tough part is, I don't know, I could look around the room, I don't know that anybody would staunchly say they're opposed to it. I just think that it's beyond what we could really make an opinion on in a lot of ways. I know I feel that way. It's, I would love for it to be researched, and I think, and especially if it's directed that we are, but, go for it. I just don't know the comfort level I have as a committee, formally going forward with it.
That's kind of what I was trying to get to was, I think the idea to explore the memorandum of understanding and to be prepared for what the state may do is a smart move. But I don't know if we're supposed to vote on that. Well, that's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, the recommendation is to sign the creation of the memo. And by and of itself, I don't think that binds anything, but again, I'm using my own opinion here. I think that kind of suggests we're in agreement with going forward, just by the nature of the way it's done. And that concerns me a little, just because I feel like it's forcing you to take an opinion on it, kind of aside. And it's not that I'm against it, I just don't know that everybody's for it. So, we can consider options. I believe one option is that we actually don't have to vote. We can try to decide as a committee to decline to make a motion and to formally address that motion. And potentially, though, still offer comments individually can be noted who is distinctly in support of it, but just didn't, as a group, feel like it was something that we wanted to do as a formal motion. So I'll throw that out for discussion. That's another potential. I believe we can do that. So I say that. I know you're really much in support, so I don't know.
No, but what I was gonna say is that even with like the new executive director search, what the board, what we voted on last month at the board meeting was for each person, instead of inviting the CAC to interview the candidates, encourage the people's appointees for the CAC to get with their board members. And so I think that that's something that, like, not taking an official stance here, but for all of you to voice your thoughts to the person or board or entity that you are representing here. So Brian, in your case, like Mayor Ross, like your personal thoughts. And I think that that is a way of you all, everybody weighing in on it without having to take a formal motion, without knowing where people are, because I know that that is what the board, what we discussed last month in regards to the executive director search. So that's something that's already kind of in place. So the board knows, is aware that that's happening for something else. So take advantage of that, of saying, hey, your thoughts on what the technical advisory committee should look like, structure should look like under the MOU. Just throwing that there. And that's not a formal vote, that's just it's already happening.
I do think that, that comments specifically on how the committees would be structured, particularly at TAC, would be very appropriate and helpful to the board and their consideration.
Right, well, that's kind of, I wanted to say, we kind of got into a discussion about approval or not approval, but outside of that, I still want to ask if anybody has an opinion about the makeup of boards or any other aspect of it. If they feel it's a pro or a con, they want to hear that. But I think right now, I want to stay on the topic of, as far as making a motion to approve it and what the opinion of the committee as a whole is. Because technically, I don't vote, so it's up to somebody to make a motion in a second. Or we would decide as a group, and I don't know if I'm using the right word, but basically to decline to make a motion, but nevertheless have reflected in comments our opinions, which was, for as me as the chair, I would say I'm not opposed to it. I just don't know that I sit in the structure. And frankly, if I talk to my executive director, I don't know that she would have a say enough to know whether we would recommend it or not. I think 100% they should go forward with doing the study and seeing. It is, especially since we're kind of being told to be done. And I appreciate the pros of doing it. And I have a feeling that might be where it ends up. It's just more of a position to take today. We got to address. So that's, so anybody else want to offer? Anybody else have an opinion they want to? Yes, Brian.
Elizabeth, specifically, is there going to be a TPO staff member dedicated to this 40 hours a week? Or is this something that's more of a back burner type of duty for staff?
Yeah, it's definitely a collateral duty. I've been helping Beth as she's gone and explored all of this with all of the jurisdictions and the TMA. So it's been collateral duty for me. I will continue to stay on this. I think the next executive director also understands how important this proposal is. So it's top of mind for them as well. But yeah.
My other question is just about the termination clause. I'm assuming the board is allowed to terminate this agreement at any time, regardless of how, well, assuming they don't want to, let's say in year 23, that the apportionment side of it doesn't go in the favor that the board wants to go, that they can terminate it in 23 or 24 at that time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can't remember what the termination clauses are in the MOU, but it has gone through the Hillsborough Legal Counsel. So Cameron Clark has reviewed it. So I'd have to go back and confirm that termination language, but it is not a binding, it's not binding. If the next TPO board did not want to continue to participate, there isn't a mechanism to terminate the agreement.
And those are the kind of things that sometimes get overlooked, and just, that's one reason we're here, is to think about those, hey.
Yeah,
what
good
is
point.
that discussion? So,
And then my last question was just about, has the other counties also done public outreach at this stage?
So we partnered with Pasco and Pinellas to do that public outreach survey. The MPO teams in Pasco and Pinellas are also going to their municipalities and getting that information from others. So we worked together on that survey that solicited over 1,700 results, and they're documenting too what their communities are hearing as this merger conversation progresses.
When will those results be made public?
So we actually just finalized a memo essentially summarizing all of that. So it should be on the SCTPA, the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance website within the next week or so. And Brian, I know when Beth went to speak to City Council, Temple Terrace City Council, I know Commissioner Abel, I think her name is, was asking about the survey. So we'll make sure that the results get to the clerk so that they're able to see it, because I know in particular she was interested in the results of the survey.
Great, thank you. And then I guess just in terms of commenting, I know, again, TPO attended our city council to give them a little background on what's going on. And just from the discussion that I heard, most of it was just concerned about the losing a seat at the table, being one of the smaller cities, at least within Hillsborough County. We're not the smallest when you compare us to Pinellas County, but losing that seat on the table is certainly a voice that Mayor Ross is obviously looking into.
I'm sure that won't be the only case. And again, I think that's beyond the, that's what I do feel like I'm going back to. As the chair, it's not my ultimate decision on who votes for what, but I still have money. So anybody else want to make comments?
Just for the committee's knowledge, our collective memory says that if people are abstaining, then they don't count towards the quorum, which if 4 people abstain, basically, we don't have a quorum to make a decision. So that's just for your information.
Okay, so just to confirm, we did have at least 4, and I don't know if anybody else planned to abstain on this vote, but based on, I'm going to talk my thoughts out loud. Based on the fact that at least 4 individuals have indicated they would abstain from voting, we would not have a quorum and not have the ability to make a motion and vote on it. So as far as somewhat closing the book on that aspect of this discussion, my recommendation would just be that the comments reflect the committee considered this. We were not in opposition nor in favor. We simply feel like we didn't have enough information, and it was beyond the charge of this committee to make a decision, notwithstanding the comments from some individual persons, such as Gina, who's fully supportive from the airport side. That's great. Have that put in the comments. And anybody else that wants to make a formal, if you feel like you want to have your agency on the record, at least in the comments, please say so now. Otherwise, the rest of the conversation is simply any discussions or comments about the plan itself and the makeup of committees. Anybody else want to make a comment? Yes.
I will say, I don't know where my board stands. The characters are very similar to the TPO board, so it's probably mixed. But at a staff level, this just highlights the importance of coordination. We constantly talk with the STA, and I'm trying to build that bridge with Go Pasco as well, especially now that TBARDA is sunsetting. Like Gina was saying, transportation is regional. So to me, this whole conversation needs to happen, whether it's forced or not by Tallahassee or not. Because people don't get out of their car at the county line and then they hop on a different car, and then they walk over and then they hop on another car. So yeah, I'm glad we're having the conversation, but it seems like there's a lot of technicalities that still need to be figured out.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so as far as voting, I don't believe there'll be a motion. Any other comments on the makeup of the committees? One other thing I would mention is if they were to go to like a single regional wide technical advisory committee, I mean, I think most of the people on here would not be reflected on that because they just would be out of irrelevant. So it would have to, if you were to go that way, Elizabeth, I think you really have to consider, I think your pool of candidates would be pretty small that could speak to all 3 counties on, you know, most every topic that came in. That may be something to think about. I really enjoy this one because we have such a diverse makeup of, you know, represented committees and agencies. I mean, and I think that really helps get a great perspective for the committees in general. And I think everybody nodding their heads agrees with that. I think we would lose that a little bit with a single regional committee. So, any other comments or questions on this topic? And I think we can close the book. Or Elizabeth, if you have anything you'd like to say, feel free.
No, thank you for your insightful feedback. I've been taking a lot of notes.
Okay. All right, no other comments. I think that closes out all agenda items. Do we have any other old or new business? Okay, wait.
Yes, 2 announcements. One is that tomorrow at 5 p.m. there is a meet and greet with the 3 executive director finalist candidates in this building on the first floor multi-purpose room. There are also flyers on the table over there for another event at 6:30 p.m. They're yellow and they grab them on your way out.
Those were the 2 events.
Yes.
Okay. All right, any other comments? I appreciate everybody's attention today, and with that, we will close the meeting.
So we're actually voting on